Hello, Mike. Hi.
Nancy, how are you? How's everything going?
Not bad. It is morning my time, but lunchtime for you, right?
Yeah, I'm a little bit ahead of you over here, over in New York.
You're in New York and I'm in California. And I know that we are also streaming on your feed. So for those who might be tuning in who don't know me yet, my name is Nancy. I'm a PM coach, and I met Mike via one of my posts on LinkedIn, where I talked about the tough challenges that we face as product managers that we don't really talk about. And that's how Mike and I connected.
Yeah, great topic that connects a lot of us.
Yes. And I wish,
Unfortunately,
yeah, I wish, you know, more people feel more comfortable talking about some of these things. And as you know, the product management role is tough, and sometimes it can also feel lonely. What has your PM journey been like? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
yeah, it's meandered a lot. I've worked across 14 different countries, haven't lived in them, but worked across about 14 to 15 different countries over my career. So that gave me rich perspective, and working with a lot of diverse folks has made me understand that there's not one way to do product management. Specifically, there's not one way to even interact with your manager either. So I've been in banking, telco, health, wellness, from startup to global multinational companies, and very, very fortunate to build with some really, really high performing folks. But I think when we talk about tough work situations, because of those different industries, because of
Yeah.
all the different types of business models, you're going to have certain personalities, certain interactions, as well as different ways to kind of collaborate. And I think that kind of gets to the root of what we're going to speak about here is, at the end of the day, you're dealing with problems, and most problems are people related, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's communication, expectations, or common understanding and empathy. Seems to be some threads we're going to probably pull on today.
You also teach a course on your free time. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I help facilitate some product leadership courses and product management courses actually on a platform called Gigantic. So shout out to Michael Saka, who's the CEO there, who brought me on because I saw a pulling need for folks that were transitioning from individual contributor to become
Mm-hmm.
leaders. It is focused more on product, but there's a lot of information that you can kind of transpose to other disciplines there. Um, yeah, so that's been really fun for me because I get a lot of looks at different businesses, different trials and tribulations that people are going through. That's very related to this.
Yeah, and I'm sure in your conversations with your mentees and your students, topics on navigating work situation, a tough work situation, must come up from time to time, right?
Yeah, and I definitely don't know them all. All I can do is share anecdotes from experiences I had
Yeah.
and smart people that I've observed, like yourself, on how to deal with them.
Let's start talking about some of the most popular topics. The first one is misalignment and building trust with stakeholders. Now, why do you think this is problematic for people?
Yeah, I think if you kind of zoom out and think about the higher level focus that a PM or product manager has, you're at the nexus of the company. So odds are you're probably stakeholdering with more of the company than anyone else is,
Hmm.
regardless if it's a 10-person or 10,000-person company, right? So there's going to be misalignment around goals, maybe with not understanding each other's roles, whether it's in product or others, requests that are going to come to you that may not be forecasted. And the most important is like potentially a mistrust or politic
Yeah.
piece.
By the way, we have a shout out from your audience, Brian.
Oh, Brian. What's up, Brian? Thanks for the shout out.
All right. So why do you think mistrust can happen?
Yeah, so I think mistrust kind of goes back to how are you really starting the relationship, and it comes down to like integrity and reliability, right? Where if you don't have that kind of integrity and reliability, like saying what you're gonna saying what's right to say, and then doing what you're saying you're gonna do, right? Not only that, but are you showing integrity by putting customers and the company first, rather
Mhm.
than yourself? And then potentially, are you going about seeking objectivity? Um, I think those are like some of the two things that you can bolster your integrity. And then when it comes to reliability, like I mentioned, saying what you'll do and doing what you say, and
Mhm.
making commitments that you can actually meet. Also, a little bit of a over communication, especially in these virtual world days, around issues and actions can also show reliability. But I think the biggest root cause around that is based on what I said, is that we're not really focusing on the integrity and reliability, and maybe sometimes we're not identifying and highlighting the right benefits to our stakeholders.
Who are these stakeholders? Just so that we could understand them a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anyone from a senior leader,
Mm.
say if you're a product manager or a product leader in finance or marketing, um, to like a junior engineer who's kind of working on another team that you need to that your team is blocked with, right? So being able to kind of zoom in and zoom out based on who the audience is, and context switch,
Right.
and share with them what you need from them or what they may need from you, I think is super important when it comes to stakeholder management.
I love that you ended with that, knowing what they need from us. So, oftentimes, when we're just doing product work, um, we have to put on our user empathy hats, right? We're trying to understand what our users need, what their problems are, right? The user problems and their motivations and their pain points. Well, similarly, with stakeholder management, we can also put on our user empathy hats and treat them, well, kind of perceive them and see that they're one of our users, different from the product users, but they can be seen as users of our services. Product management oftentimes is providing some kind of service to our stakeholders. That's how
Mhm.
I like to see it sometimes. And so when I have more empathy for who they are and what their needs are, it makes me mm, more empathetic to the kind of understanding the requests that they're making. So that's one tactic that has worked for me in the past.
Yeah. And I think you kind of hit it on the head when it comes to empathy. Although an overused term, super critical as a skill set to have as a product person,
Hmm.
because empathy also comes across in, let me communicate to this person in the way they want to be communicated to,
Yeah.
right? Think about like a sign of empathy is effective communication. So if I'm
Mm.
speaking, if I got 30 seconds, in the age old adage of like an elevator pitch, if I have 30 seconds with a senior person in an elevator, virtual elevator, whatever you want to call it, like I better make sure that my communications is crisp and succinct
Yeah.
by showing empathy for what they're going through. And the flip side, like maybe you have to tailor your communications in written form to maybe an engineer or more of a technical person, because that's how they like to consume it, and that's the level of detail they need.
Love that.
Empathy comes from communication and how you communicate.
Right.
um, and then also going back to what I mentioned before, right, around like understanding where they're coming from, what their
Mm.
goals are, which kind of brings us into like another topic around misalignment and building trust with stakeholders, is those misaligned goals. So how many times, Nancy, as a as being a product person, have you received what felt like random requests?
All the time.
All the time, right? And that's part of the problem, right?
I am
You're
part of
you're
the problem.
you're
Yes.
part of the problem as a
Yes.
product person, because maybe, just maybe, you didn't really understand their needs or what's important to them and
Absolutely.
integrate it in the roadmap while you were building a roadmap. I'm not
Right.
telling you to listen to what everyone's saying and just aggregate what they're requesting and put it in a roadmap.
Yeah.
But if you have a strong strategy that is somewhat built with your stakeholders as you build that strategy, as you kind of put in the roadmap, which again, the roadmap is an artifact that supports the how we're going to get to that strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You're creating some of the byproduct of what feels like random requests. So if you're not continuing to share out what Jane Doe from finance or John
Yeah.
Smith from marketing, what you're working on and why it's important. But if you can't point to that, what seems like a random request, that there's commonalities. Is it solving a customer problem? Is it aligning with the company or even product strategy? Then you can start to take that in consideration. But a lot of the times we feel that it feels like a random, like saying no to random requests. And this is an uncomfortable situation. So tactics like that is like connecting back to the vision, strategy, and priorities, like I mentioned.
Yeah, I love that.
And
It might feel random, but it really is not.
yeah.
And that is a moment where we should look inward and assess, why does this feel random? It really shouldn't. It should fall under some kind of theme, right? It should fall under some kind of bucket. But if it's random, that means we didn't have a theme for it.
Mm,
We didn't have a bucket for it. Why? What was the reason? If there was no reason and it was just simply an oversight, then it's on us to come up with the right themes. It's
right.
also on us to prioritize the most important themes that we should focus on as part of the strategy, like you mentioned, Mike.
Yep.
Um, when we're intentional about prioritizing certain themes over others, and when stakeholders understand that intention, then the random requests should no longer feel random, or they should at least decrease over time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And listen, like there are going to be things that come up that you're not planning for. That's life, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have to build in some buffer or earmark some allocation of for unforeseen things, right? We saw
Yes.
that in the beginning of 2020. Like nobody predicted it was going to sustain for that long as it is. So
Right.
companies had to pivot. But like I mentioned, like understanding the need and importance of what they're requesting, making sure we're connecting back to like strategy or priorities and really asking those clarifying questions to really
Yeah.
understand what their KPIs are as well. Um, and then at the end of the day is like making sure they feel heard and
Yeah.
respected, but then reminding them what other considerations that you have to manage, right? Like you're not the only random request. Um, how could I be decisive about this, but then
Hmm.
also transparent on everything else that's not only on my plate, but everything else that others are asking for.
Right.
And you're gonna have to stack rank them sometimes.
Yeah.
And you're gonna have to. I think what it comes down to is like communication, empathy, and transparency. And then, like we mentioned, like all these problems are more or less people problems. So if you can
Right.
kind of nail those three things, you'll probably be in a better place than you were yesterday.
I love that you mentioned understanding their KPIs. Ideally, product KPIs should support their KPIs, and let's just call their APIs business KPIs. It might not be business KPIs, but for this conversation, we could assume that it is. Ideally, product KPIs should ladder up to business KPIs. And that laddering up should be made clear to everyone that this is how the product contributes to top line
Mhm.
goals. But if it doesn't, then there has to be a reason why. It could be, it's different from the product strategy, etc. And when we're trying to figure out where this quote unquote random request would fit, the first we have to be clear on what level and what granularity we're having the conversation on. Is it about this particular request, or is it on a KPI level?
Mhm.
So just making sure that everyone has a common vocabulary can also speed up some of these conversations that could spin otherwise.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
it
common
has yeah, it helps. It helps when we have common vocabulary. um, there's an article written about what's the okay, now I have to go look it up. But carry on, Mike. I'll circle back.
Yeah, I think establishing a shared language is really big, right? When you talked about having a common vocabulary, meaning like whether that's your product manager, product leader, and you're interacting with your core team. So let's just your core team is engineering, product, and design. Let's throw data in there as well: data
Mm-hmm.
analyst, data ops, data engineering. All those that core working team should all be on the same page in terms of a shared vocabulary around what expectations in terms of the values of how we operate, meaning what decisions are reversible, when do we share designs,
Mm-hmm.
what commitments can we make now that we have to punt a little bit later, how do we like what is our common understanding on how much tech debt do we pay down versus driving net new growth at the mercy of tech debt? So just kind of having this like common understanding, and oh yeah, we're all marching towards the same drum as to why we're building.
Right.
You had to boil down, right? If we just blew up the product management practice, and you can argue that there are some companies maybe trying to do that. Um, we can throw in things like AI, but all that stuff aside, is like some of the superpowers that I've seen from some product managers I've worked with, worked for, have worked for me, is they control the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and they're demonstrating and showcasing the why we're building stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe they're helping with sequencing, but ultimately you have the narrative around what the customer pain points are. You know what the business outcomes that you need to hit. And you're giving that business context to your larger pod or core team.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe engineer and design and anyone else can help with the sequencing of when to build it.
Right.
But ultimately, if I had one skill set to kind of bring to the table as a PM, it would be around like the why we're building it. And the why comes in form of fashion of like establishing like these certain types of communications on how to communicate that why and the structure and the process of how to do that.
Absolutely. And I found an article that I was thinking about. It's titled Canonical Everything.
Oh, I'll
Canonical
read it.
Everything. Yeah, maybe I could put the link in the chat. It's written by one of the VPs at Meta,
Oh,
and
okay.
there is a structured way of communicating, whether it's your work streams or owners or the right way of saying things, so that we use common terminology, so that there
Mm,
is no confusion even at the language level, and it just helps with execution. um, the more we could get clear on what we mean with certain words, then we remove some of the gray areas. Like, what do you said that word, but what did you? All right, so we can skip all of that. Uh, we can minimize the time it takes to just get alignment when there's canonical everything.
yeah, well said.
Yeah, and I love what you said about understanding the why. And this is where, again, canonical everything would help if everyone can recite the why in 2 seconds.
Hmm.
Then it really speeds up execution every time when we're saying no to something, or every time we say yes to something. Why is that? Well, we
Hmm.
always optimize for user sentiment over ads revenue,
Right.
for example, right? That's I kind of just like made it up. But when the why is very clear on why we're building products this way or why we're making decisions this way, it just helps bring people along, and it minimizes the spinning.
Yep. Yeah. And you can chalk that up to like going back to first principles,
Yeah, totally.
right? So I use the analogy, Nancy, if we're on the same product team and we all went and won the lottery, and we decided, you know what, working full time is not for me. I'm done with that. I'm sitting pretty with all this cash. But we had a whole new product team on board, and we had to onboard them as we were walking out. If you can point to a few artifacts, it would be around like those first principles, right? Where
Hmm.
you talked about like, hey, we like over index on on providing value to the customer, and then we provide business results because we created customer value, or we objectively always do what's right for the customer, for any of those type of first
Yeah.
principles. And then you start using artifacts like the roadmap that's based on a vision-led strategy. Like, it's easy, right, when it comes to like tough work
Yeah.
situations, it's
Yeah.
easy to fall into the trap of like of buts and ifs. But if you're pointing to
Yes.
like clear communication,
Yes.
articulating the why, and then taking an empathetic approach, you know, once we hit that lottery, we shouldn't have there shouldn't be much ramp up from that new team that's coming on, because these things are established, these
Love
processes
that.
and these artifacts are there.
Love that. I love that. Let's talk about what happens when we are disappointed
Oh,
with particular outcomes. Again, it happens all the time. Tell us more.
yeah. Yeah. So like, have you ever been in a situation where, you're working on something and it feels like the right thing to do, but unfortunately it doesn't ship to the quality that you wanted? Or have you ever been in a situation where maybe you've shipped something and it was too late, right? Or you ever been in a situation where going through the process of doing it, even if the outcome or the output, I should say, like shipping that feature or experience
Mm,
worked, but going through it was just so tough, right? Those things, the answer is yes to all.
mm-hmm.
If you're in product, and things are probably going to be more disappointing than not. Like, odds are in product, you're probably going to have less of a win rate, right? We all put on our resumes, we all put on our profiles, all the wins, but odds are day in, day out, the law of numbers is probably going to say like it's not going to work out to what you have like thought about, or you maybe telegraphed when you first penned the strategy or feature. So some, you can really chalk it up to like, maybe it's there's an unclear problem definition, right? So sometimes we don't know, we're not clear on what the customer needs are, maybe fully, and we're not creating the right type of value to address them. So that can kind of come to like, are you formally documenting the problems, and you providing that evidence to inform like what's the magnitude of this problem, right? Or maybe there's like poor implementation, like point blank, right? Where the use cases and the designs aren't maybe sufficiently validated by customers, or maybe they're like addressing the other main product risks, but maybe you need to do more customer research to really truly understand the need. Maybe you have to dog food the product if you don't. Like, that's one of the my principles is like, I should be able to use it to some capacity,
Mm.
to dog food that product to really understand what the user is going through. Um, Maybe you actually don't have realistic assumptions. So maybe the team is looking to set ambitious goals, but not accounting for all these risks. So how are you like explicit upfront about these and do sanity checks to validate that early? All could be like byproducts and root causes of disappointing outcomes.
I would say let's first address the emotional layer to this. Why are we disappointed? It's because we had some kind of expectation. But was our expectation actually correct?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe the expectation should be we're going to learn a lot
Mm-hmm.
from this process, right? Ultimately, of course, what we want is to win, right? Ultimately, we want to see that the product KPIs are actually moving business KPIs, right? Ultimately, that's what we want. But there's also a lot of goodness that can come from just the journey itself. So maybe the expectation should be that it's okay that I don't win every single battle because I might still win the war.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, my invitation to everyone is let's zoom out every time we feel disappointed about something. Because looking back in history or world history or just my personal history, I feel like every time I got disappointed, it didn't stay that way forever, right? It's not a eternal thing. there's always light at the end of the tunnel, or at least I choose to
Yeah.
believe, right? At the end of the day, it's what do I choose to believe and how do I choose to operate. So from the emotional layer, I invite everyone to just be okay with a particular outcome in this particular moment, assuming that we learn from it and we take action based on what we're learning.
Agreed. Agreed. Totally. Yeah.
So, for all the different types of root causes that Mike you covered, all of these are great learnings, right? And if it wasn't for that journey that led to quote unquote disappointing outcome, we probably would not have learned about those things.
Yeah.
But then we just do it again. And then the second time we do it, we're probably more likely to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even like an outcome of, for example, um, even if the metrics like look to be trending in the right direction, did it mitigate a relationship to get to that means to an end? Like basically, like did you have to kind of override someone?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to kind of maybe not play nicely in the sandbox?
Right.
Um, in order to get that outcome, right? So maybe like that outcome doesn't seem disappointing on paper, but now guess what? Going into the next project, it's going to be an even tougher work situation
Yeah.
with that team or that person if you went around them, if you didn't make sure you're showing the correlation of their input versus what the output is. I think that's like another thing, right? You want to feel like you're like valuing those other folks as it relates to like bleeding together stakeholder management or mending together stakeholder management and these disappointing outcomes. Like you want those stakeholders to be part of the process to some level of capacity,
Mm-hmm.
because then all of a sudden they become accountable to the output or the outcomes too,
Right.
right? So we did talk about like disappointing outcomes, but you want to show like the causality between Nancy's input on this product if Nancy's not even in the product team, and then reading out that outcome, whether it's actual metrics that you can measure, sentiment, or a long tail type of thing like ARR, like revenue, like later on. Like there are ways to go about not only mending a relationship, but making sure they're also accountable. But I wanted to point out, like sometimes outcomes can look fine on paper, but
Mm-hmm.
it compromise the relationship, a process, in the ways to get there.
On the flip side, um, outcome might look bad on paper, but you have built really strong relationships with people.
True, that's a good one.
And that is a win on its own.
Right, right.
And sometimes the disappointing outcome is people related, not necessarily product related.
Yeah, for sure.
I've been
I know.
disappointed many times because of people reasons.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this as a bonus topic, which is what happens when we just can't seem to get along with our managers.
Mm,
I've
yeah,
definitely been there, and that was very disappointing.
that's a tough one.
Yeah, but let's put a pin on that because we're gonna circle back.
Cool.
All right, tell us about inter-team complications
Yeah.
as a one of the tough work situations.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of these things are just naturally flowing, right? These are
Yeah.
all like interrelated.
Mhm.
Like talking about like that connective tissue across within your team. So your team, to define that, that could be like I mentioned, like your engineering product design team, or it can be like the larger cross-functional team that you maybe operate with. But I want to focus the conversation a little bit more on those that you're like working with more in the daily or weekly versus like a longer touch point cadence, because those are the folks you're interacting with all the time, right? So if you're not understanding those team dynamic, and this is as a leader, individual contributor, whatever level, this is all important. But I think you have to make sure It's funny, Nancy and I joked that like, why does the product manager have to be the grown up on the team sometimes? Right? Like, why do we get like tasked with the grown up? And I'm not saying that to be cavalier, but it's more about like, there's times where like I have an opinion. I'm a human. I want to do something a certain way, but
Right.
I have to make sure that the team is on the same page, that we're recognizing and addressing that confusion. So there, like I mentioned at the tip of this call, like I feel very, very strongly that the product manager has more context on the overall company and business than almost anyone at the company does. If it's a
Hmm.
smaller founder led company, I'm sure the founder does.
Yeah.
But being in product, and there's times as a junior product person, you're called on for very strategic things and be like, what is the customer sentiment on this persona? What is the tech stack we're going to use? And you have to kind of at least have all that context.
Yeah.
So there's times where you have complications within a team because they don't have all the context. So
Mm.
um, sometimes, whether you're a leader or not, you have to continue to repeat why it's important
Mm.
and explain it in different ways, right? So we obviously have our vision, we have our strategy. We talked about some key principles in OKRs, but like, how are you explaining these things to a whole team so they're hearing the same message? How do you do it in a scalable way? So think about like, do you do it asynchronously? Do
Yeah.
you go ahead and like we talked about like the value of having artifacts to point to? Obviously, if it's hard in person, could you do it on a video chat? There are certain things that you may have to go ahead and document. If you notice you're saying something in one-on-ones multiple times, it's the same thing. You might have to just document that or create some type of Loom or video message where it's scalable to do that. I think a bigger piece. So we talked a little bit about like the context and not having like asymmetric information. So you're operating with all this information, the rest of the team isn't. So what goes
Right.
back to what we spoke about, Nancy, about like establishing the why, giving your engineers, designers, like all the context. But then what about when you're working with someone maybe outside of engineering, product, and design? Let's say like a marketing leader, like there or a marketing person who reports up to like say a CMO or marketing leader. There's like
Hmm.
conflicting messages from leaders, right? Like I
Yes.
thought our company focus or even like our product focus was on A and then marketing thinks it's on B,
Right.
right? So that comes back to like the communication that we talked about earlier and the complications around that. So how are you actively rooting out those conflicting message or disconnects and how you can work in unison to make sure that like handling that is obviously a big balancing act.
I love that you highlighted that because oftentimes we might feel like we have to address every single complication or every single conflict on our own. But when the reason for the complication or the reason for the conflict is coming from the top, as in maybe Mike and Nancy are asked to work together, but my goals are different from Mike's and maybe they're conflicting. So I'm going to use the same example I used just earlier. Maybe my goal is to increase user sentiment and Mike's goal is to increase ads revenue. They can conflict oftentimes, right? When we are told to work together and our goals don't align, of course, we're not going to see eye to eye on
Mhm.
everything. And that's just natural and that's a given. But when that happens, there's nothing we could do on our own but to ask for help, as in, we have to escalate.
Yeah.
Sometimes PMs don't feel comfortable escalating because we feel like, oh wait, I'm supposed to figure this out on my own. I'm not supposed to, ask for help because I'm the leader of the team. But we also need to recognize what we can do on our own versus what we cannot. In this case, when the conflict is because CMO and CPO don't align,
Yeah.
like there's nothing we can do but to escalate. But the way we do it is let's do it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would challenge anyone, and I've been in that situation too, right? It's so much easier to be like, let's both individually escalate up to our managers and have them solve it. But think about like how scalable is that, right? If you constantly have to use your manager as a
Mhm.
crutch, then it's all of a sudden, or you constantly have to call on your manager, that manager not only becomes a crutch, but then they potentially lose faith in you to like elevate your role to handle things like that.
Yeah.
Right. But going back to something like super core at what you mentioned is like if we have conflicting KPIs, unfortunately for product managers, it's kind of on you to articulate if we increase customer value, it's going to show business outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Create customer value, then the business outcomes would come. That's a super simplistic world. We all know about all these frameworks that we talk about, like do right by the customer and your business goals will come. Like I get it. It's not as easy as that.
Yeah.
But if you can point to that type of like approach and narrative with your coworkers, so even for the, let's say someone in finance, right? That's like, okay, I do care about the customer, but not at the mercy of like my margins or my unit
Yeah.
economics,
Yeah.
right? But how are you kind of telling that narrative on, hey, like we're going to do this because this is a customer pain point, but we also forecast that this is something the customer may or may not need going forward. This may not make us like 10x growth in revenue overnight, but it's more of a sustainable way to drive profitable growth, right? So I think like it's you're kind of on the hook. I feel
Yeah.
again, maybe I'm taking more accountability and acting, trying to take that ownership mentality than you need to at some places, but at least taking that approach and then pointing to something objectively. Yeah, Nancy, I know I'm really into like the business focus outcomes. You're really into like increasing customer sentiment, but how do you map like driving higher customer sentiment? You, Nancy, being in product, how do you map higher customer sentiment and increasing those product metrics, which are more leading
Mm-hmm.
indicators? And then how does ARR or MRR revenue, monthly revenue or annual revenue, like follow that? And that could be
Right.
long tail,
Yeah,
right? And that's not going to be
definitely.
perfect either. So I think there's like a balancing act with that. And it kind of comes back to what we mentioned before about like what is that correlation of potentially like metrics of causality with what you're working on in product and what output metrics can be.
Yes, and I love that you called it out. When we ask for help, the right way of asking for help is not, my hands are tied,
Yeah.
tell me what to do, right? When we ask for help, it's mainly the thing that has worked for me is, hey, Mike, let's propose a way forward. But the way forward is not something that we could just move forward with until we get buy-in. So when we ask for help, it's more about let's propose a way forward and let's see if management agrees. Because
Yeah.
fundamentally, we don't really align at the KPI level. But here's a proposal. What do you think,
Right.
management? Yeah,
Right.
both sides of management.
Yes, yes, both
Yes,
sides. And I
yes.
think like we I don't know if we joked about this. I wouldn't say joke, but we kind of danced around this before previously, Nancy, when for example, if you need somebody from someone else, if you need something from someone else and they're just not respond. I actually had like a mentee of mine who brought this
Mhm.
like, what do I do when I'm slacking someone and they're just not responding? I'm like, well, there's multiple reasons why. One, they could just be overloaded with work. But
Mhm.
what I think it's like what you're asking for is probably just not the top of their list. Like in
Yeah,
your world, it's like number one,
yeah,
right? Because you're
yeah,
blocked and I need Nancy to help me with something. And she's just not even answering. So it could be boiled down to a few things. And tactically, it's like, what else is on your plate? Here's
yep,
why this thing I'm asking from you is so important. Here's how it ladders up to the company vision, whatever you can point to objectively. Oh yeah. Also, Nancy, the designer or analyst, whatever role she's in that you need something is like, what else is on your plate that I can help either help with tactically,
yeah,
or what could I help prioritize with you? Not saying this is not important, that's not important, this is important, but like help you understand where I'm coming from, help you show kind of prop that other person up and be like, here's the value you would create if you help unblock me. So now she feels invested and accountable with the success or the progress of it. And then what else could you kind of like show that empathy that you mentioned earlier in this chat to see like, oh man, I didn't realize all the things that were on her plate. Now I understand that like she maybe needs another week to get back to me with an answer, right? So I think it's like taking the empathetic approach, pointing to something objectively that you know is important for the company, and showing the value that that person who's blocking you or that you need something from can help unlock and drive progress.
Uh, I remember in one of the interview questions that was asked of me was, "What does the worst day look like for you?"
Oh,
And I remember saying the worst day is when I know that I'm the reason for blocking other people.
yeah.
And I love that you share this example. Um, at the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants to block others. It's never the core intention, right? The intention is never, well, I'm just gonna block Mike.
Right.
It's always because we're just doing a bunch of other things. And that's why to me the worst day is I know it's like Mike and Dan and Mary, like everyone is waiting for me to do something, and that's the worst day for me. Um, because what feels really bad for our PM is the team can't progress or the team can't make progress because of the PM.
Right. Right.
That's just one of the most terrible feelings.
Uh,
Um, and so I developed a habit, which is sometimes I might not even know that I'm the blocker, but you need to tell me when that happens.
mm,
Um, so one way to kind of layer on what Mike has shared about understanding what the other person is also working on, all of that. The extra layer is you be be very clear that I am blocked. Sometimes we don't know that you're blocked.
yeah.
Sometimes we thought you're just asking a question.
Mm, well said.
All right, so now let's talk about our bonus topics.
Mm,
Let's talk about managers and their role in getting us promoted. Or
yeah.
is it their role or is it their job?
Lukewarm take, not spicy, but lukewarm take. It's not your manager's job to get you promotion. It's not your manager's job to really do a lot of. I mean, again, my take doesn't mean it's the right take, but I think I've over-indexed on putting too much stock and weight into my first line manager in order to get me a promotion. Right? Like
Yeah.
they're going through the same things you're going through. Right? They're trying to learn, they're trying to drive impact. And yeah, what's the byproducts of that is that they're trying to elevate their career as well, like to be frank.
Yes.
So like they're going through the same motions you are, maybe you're just like one level up. That's not to say that like you abandoned driving value to your manager at all costs, right? There's discourse out there and advice that's like provide as much value, unblock your manager, do the things that they don't like doing, reduce pain, right, from them. And like there are things you should be doing, but I think what we're talking about is like don't over index on just your manager and holding that them as on a pedestal that's going to get you to that next level.
I like to think of promotion as finding product market fit,
Mm,
up market, and seeing us as in the PM as the product that has a fit in this market. So when we're getting promoted, that means we're serving a different market from the one that we were serving before. Now, the caveat here, well, not really the caveat, but the prerequisite is that there has to be a market at the next level. And some of it is dependent on your manager's um, uh, kind of supporting you and maybe even letting you know that there's a market. But the prerequisite here is that you as a product needs to fit this other market that may or may not have a need.
hmm
So it's not the manager's job to get you that promotion, but the manager definitely has a role to play. Now, what are some of the tactics or advice you have, Mike, for people who have been working toward their promotion but haven't gotten it yet?
Yeah, I think having advocates,
Mm.
right? Specifically, advocates that have some understanding of what you do or your product, not just like building a good relationship with like somebody in marketing or building a good relationship, even some other product leader somewhere else that you don't directly report to, but having advocates that know what you're doing and know that the value that you're bringing to the company is like material in some way. Um, and then having more or less like a sponsor. So not so much like a sponsor who's like going to go way out of their way and put their own name on the line, but infusing in the right times. And you have to provide value to them somehow, right? So whether that's like showing that, you know, you're negotiating maybe on your own roadmap to drive, like say if you're in marketing and you need to build like you know, stitch together an API that would help with some marketing technology or onboarding, and you know that's
Mhm.
really important to the marketing team to drive qualified leads, say, showing that like, yeah, I'm going to prioritize this because I do see credibility, even though if my conviction's not as high on something that I'm building already on my roadmap. It's like a little bit of a soft politics approach of like, I'm going to go ahead and build credit in the credit bank with this team, so to speak, and then using that credit to ultimately have a bank of credit that maybe all of a sudden that you get a sponsor in the marketing team where they're at the seat, they're at conversations that you're not privy
Right.
to or you're not part of. Oh yeah, Mike and his team actually built this. And here's all the goodness that we got of it. Or they sunsetted a product even though we wanted to keep it sustained and we realized that was the right decision, right? So it's like
Right.
trying to anchor on providing value to others. But I think another thing for me that I have had a big trap is I always thought that my work speaks for itself.
Mm.
And I think we all think that. I think the large majority of
We
people think
want to. We want
we
to think
want to
that.
think that, right?
Yeah.
Do a good job, keep
Yeah.
your head down, show outcomes, right? Whether that's like quantitative or qualitative, show these outcomes and it will speak for itself. When in fact, like even over not to the fact that you're annoying, but like making sure you have a regular cadence of communication on updates, on decisions being made, builds that trust. Now I know like I have high conviction that what Nancy's working on, like I know exactly where it's at, but she's also let me in a bit on why they decided to like pivot a bit or why they're not going and rolling out the GA with this A/B test, right? So like building that trust by like creating value to the other teams through like literally creating business value for them for their KPIs, but then also have this kind of like ongoing cadence of communication,
Right.
and then how you're communicating, obviously, like I mentioned earlier are ways to kind of build advocacy, or you can call them like sponsors.
Let me try to summarize it in product market fit terms, right? So
Love
this
it.
analogy of making sure that we as a product has a product market fit. An element of that is the go to market. A product cannot really be adopted by the market without any go to market. So,
Mm,
your advocates, your sponsors, people who know your work, or first they need to know. And we help them know our work through go to market initiatives that we have to do on our own. That's not something that our managers could do for us. Maybe they can help,
mm,
but a big portion of it is on us.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, you got to take accountability.
Absolutely.
I'm just waiting for like your talk about like managers who aren't great. I just can't wait to get to this piece.
Ta- Ta-da! Now let's talk about it. Why is this such a complicated topic?
I don't know. I guess it goes back to like what we were saying before. It's just like some of them just became. It's like you have like, and this is near and dear to both of our hearts, is like parents of young kids. It's like you have like parents, and then you have like adults that have kids, right? Probably not the best analogy to use because my kids are like 1 and 2, so like it's such a crucial, special moment for me. But I consider myself a parent, not an
Mm,
adult that happens to have kids, and I take pride in that. But there are managers that have direct reports And then
Mm-hmm.
there are leaders, right?
Mm,
Who create other great leaders or
mm,
create or there's managers of people and then there's like leaders who drive inspiration, who elevate them.
yeah.
Uh, and for just cause, not just because they like you and like, oh, I'm going to get Nancy a promotion because her and I both like the Yankees and we vibe on Fridays, right? But like Nancy's putting in the work. Nancy's also showing she's like super eager to do something. But I think like when you have a manager that's like just not great, like you're gonna have them, and you're probably gonna have them more than you'd like, right? Um, I can give a personal example real quick, but I would also love to hear about maybe your personal example.
Yeah. You go first.
My first role, I worked at City Group, and I learned so much for what not to do. Like I learned so much from a manager of how not to operate. Um, but I didn't realize it was not how not to operate until probably like a year or two after I left the group. So I built this like muscle memory, especially being like 22 years old, thinking this is what the professional world is. This is how you operate. And, being a little vulnerable, I just thought that was the way to do things. And it just wasn't the way to do things, especially, times really, really transforming quick with digital transformation. Um, and it was effective, but the way he operated, but it wasn't sustainable. Let's just keep it
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I thought that was the right way to operate until I got into a very, very fast moving, lean organization and started realizing, oh, wait, like you actually have to like be a little bit more open to other ways of doing things. You actually have to like learn and iterate on the product rather than just saying like we're going to go the waterfall approach and this is the way we do things, right? So as much as it was around like the craft, it was also around like the interactions with other folks where it felt very transactional.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned from them what not to do. I wish I knew that a little bit earlier, but nobody tells you what's right and what's not in that situation.
The way I view quote unquote bad managers, again, I'm going to use the PMF framework way of thinking.
Yeah.
Um, I see manager as a proxy to my market. If I see myself as a product, my manager is a proxy to the market. There has to be PMF, right? There has to be product market fit anywhere I go. If there is no fit, then either I change myself as a product or I change the market.
Hmm. What would be changing the market? Going to another team, maybe?
I change the manager. So in the corporate environment that we're in, we would always have a manager, even as a CEO. We would be managed
Hmm.
somehow, investors, board, etc. Right? So first step that I invite us to think on is there PMF? Should I change the market or should I change the product?
Mm.
Of course, if there's learnings that I need to grow into or learnings I need to adopt, things I need to get better at, I really should address the feedback. I really should learn and grow. But if, and this is where we discern whether the feedback is actually constructive or not from the manager,
Mm.
then maybe I don't change the product. Maybe I find a different market.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a dead end street when we don't fit well with a manager.
Sure.
There's tons of other managers, right? Tons of other markets. So there's also the emotional layer attached to it because in a corporate setting, the manager is in a position of power. And when they operate in a way that doesn't feel supportive, the emotional layer that goes on is I'm not good enough. I don't have what it takes. I'm
Mm.
not cut out to have this job because my manager said X, Y, and Z. Some of it could be true, but some of it could also be very, very untrue.
Right.
right? So, first step is really to discern what is happening here, what is true and what is not true. And let's not anchor on the things that are not true, right? So,
Mhm.
I once had a manager who really made me feel that I'm not cut out to be a PM.
Mm.
They've used words that were so intense, it really made me question my role. But I've been doing this for 12 years or something like that. How can that be true?
Right.
I just like in the moment, of course, we spin and we start questioning everything. Maybe I don't have what it takes to be a PM. But let's also zoom out for a second. Like how can that be the ultimate truth?
She's been doing it for 12 years. Yeah.
I just can't believe that that can be true. So
Right.
when that happens, it's a product market fit issue where the market is not a fit for me as a product. So I go find another market. And then I found a manager who loved me, right? So it's not just about how we should change ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like, listen, it's to say you're going to find another market. Obviously, it's the right thing to do, but it's not as easy, especially in this
Yeah.
environment, right? Like, to be real, there are not like an abundant amount of jobs for product folks sitting around, like the zero interest rate phenomenon we've been going through in the last few years, right? Up until in the past year or
Yeah.
so. We get that, right? But what you can do in your situation, right? It's like understanding who's telling you that feedback, just like you're
Yeah.
mentioning. It's like you have to listen to the feedback, but you don't have to accept the feedback,
Mhm.
right? And you don't have to let that embody who you are, right?
Yeah.
We're not getting into the whole foo-foo positive affirmation space, but we're trying to show it's like you could still work around it, right? So especially if, like, leading up to this, you're seeing signs of, like, your manager's communicating the bare minimum. They're not providing the context that you do as other teammates. Maybe your one-on-ones are very transactional, just business, not about career development. So, like, going into this review, it's like you're probably seeing signals that, like, this is more or less not the right or the best fit for you as a manager. So, like, right off the bat, you could start to, like, unlink them potentially getting you to where you want to be. But
Right.
then what else could you do in this situation outside of, like, not anchoring, like you mentioned, or not accepting it? Is like, what selfishly could I get out of this role in this existing team? Is that learning? Is that working on side quest projects that are going to help my acumen around, say, AI or some other technology, right?
Mhm.
So, like, there are ways still to, like, accrue value for your professional development without maybe going through your manager to get to the next level. Easier said than done.
I love that you said that because it reminded me of an article that I read, which is 10% of corporate leaders are psychopaths. Let's talk
Right.
about
Excuse me.
let's talk about the psychopath archetype. Who are they and what are they like? Well, they are into themselves. They don't care about how other people feel. They manipulate others want, right? That is the archetype of psychopaths. And 10% of corporate leaders are psychopaths, according to, I think it was Forbes.
Oh, wow.
I have to dig it up again and find it. That means it's very possible that we're being led by someone who actually is not genuine. And when that happens, first thing we do is, of course, if we could get a new manager, then that is what we should do. But not given the market conditions, then we set boundaries, right? And it happens. So, first of all, know more about your manager and whether they're actually genuine or not, I would say is one thing that we should all do.
Yeah, for sure. And also, like, we've talked a lot about accountability. Like maybe that's some of your problem too. Like
Mm,
your perception of,
yeah,
John Smith not being your manager or Jane Doe not being a great manager could also be boiled down to like your lack of effort to build a relationship.
totally.
So it goes both ways. It's not just because even if the manager's a psychopath, like I pride myself on being able to work with many different types of personalities and being able to
Mhm.
kind of like be a chameleon and understand my communication style and ways to work with them. But like there are some people like point blank, you just like you mentioned, like you're just not gonna be able to vibe with. Like it's just
Yeah,
not gonna work out. But yeah, there is some accountability that we have to put on ourselves. And at least if you could say, like, I gave it a full on effort
yeah,
to really understand everything down to like I mentioned earlier, what are some of the pain points? Like, what are some of the things that the leadership team's been trying to do but just haven't been able to do, right? Like getting to those like hard questions in those areas. And in addition to building a personal relationship, right? Taking an interest in knowing what's going on in their personal life or things that are important to them too,
yeah.
could also help. But I think you got to give it a good effort there before you label them as not a great manager.
Definitely, definitely. Oh my gosh, we are up at time. It's been it's been a full hour.
Wow. That was
That
quick.
that flew by, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, tell us how we can find you and how can we better connect with you, Mike?
Yeah, just on LinkedIn, which is the QR code. Happy to chat with anyone to go deeper on some of these things, and always enjoy some of the spicy takes and lukewarm takes with your content, Nancy. And I know that you've been really helping people not only on a professional end, but also from a personal mindset. So I really applaud you for doing that.
Thank you so much. Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on my live stream.
Likewise, thanks, Nancy. Have a
Let's
great rest
do
of
it
your day.
again sometime. Thank you
For
so much.
sure. Bye bye.
Bye.